This is Move Fix Monday. What we're going to talk about in this video is the basic anatomy of stretching the hip adductors. That would be the inner thigh muscles, and there's many different muscles within the adductor group, and they attach from your pelvis off of your pubic bone. So if you think about your pubic bone as being, let's say, just like this little piece right here, they attach from different parts of the pubic bone, and then they go into the thigh at varying levels. And they all have names. Only one of them crosses the knee. There's a muscle called your gracilis, which attaches from the pubic bone, and it goes down and it crosses your knee on the inside of your knee down here. But all the other ones essentially go from somewhere on the pubic bone, and they attach into sort of the, if you imagine this bone going down longer, they attach into sort of the back middle side of the femur on this particular bony line. And so if you think about how they attach from here onto here, that has some implications for both stretching as well as the way we do certain lifts. So what's the implication? The implication would be this. Look, if you're doing something like a deadlift, which we talked about previously in the basic anatomy of stretching the hamstrings, you are taking your pelvis, like let's say where my hand is right here, and you're taking that this way while the thigh is going that way. When you do something like a squat or a sumo deadlift, you are not just going this way with the thigh going that way, your leg is going out to the side. And especially when you squat and you push your knees out, when you're doing that and you're externally rotating at the hip, that will put a little bit more tension on the adductor. So let's talk about it first with squatting. So imagine this. Imagine you're here and you think about the muscle going from here into your thigh. And of course, this would be extended much farther. But let's say you're squatting down, and as you squat, this bone comes this way, and you want to keep your back flat, so it's going to tilt back like this. Now, if you turned in, that's going to slack it, and if you turn out because of how it attaches, it's potentially going to stretch it a little bit more. Now, this is not the most clear example because I'm using a band on a skeleton model, but you can imagine that if you're going like this with your leg out, that's going to tension things differently than when you're just doing like a deadlift, because you're not getting that abduction of the hip with the external rotation, which is going to load that a little bit more. So that would be the implication in the squat. This is going back. The other attachment is going forward and coming out, so it's more of an adductor issue in the squat than it is hamstring. Because we talked last week about the hamstrings don't create a butt wink, but the adductors could, because only one of them crosses the knee. So if you bend the knee, it only slacks one. That means the other ones can be under tension when your butt goes back and your leg goes this way, and they don't get slacked by knee bending. So that's with the squat. The second would be the sumo deadlift. If you think about a regular deadlift, like I said earlier, you're going here, but in a sumo deadlift, you're going wide stance. And if you think about it, when you're sumo deadlifting, you're going wide, and if you keep your knees pretty much locked or not, not really bent, you're going to have some of that tension across the knee too. If you go more bent, there's going to be less. But clearly, different muscles will be under tension here versus here where you're hitting more hamstring. So how does that apply to us stretching? I'm actually going to go back down here again. If I were to stretch my adductors, I would put one leg out like this, and then if I turn it in, I'm not going to really hit the adductors. But if I go foot flat, or if I externally rotate, I'm going to get more adductor tension. And I'm going to start up here, and I could push straight back. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking this attachment point. When I rock my butt back, I'm taking this attachment point, pushing it this way, while this goes that way, and that's why I'm getting the stretch in the adductor. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You could just go here and rock back, feel the stretch, and you could do that. Or you could push back into the tension, and then you could work on actively rotating your femur or your hip. And that's going to change the orientation of that attachment point on the thigh, and that's going to make the muscle go through a shortening and lengthening while you're here. And your goal here is to not let your low back round, because, and I forgot to mention this, when your low back rounds, and it's because the adductors, you're going down, they're pulling the pubic bone forward if they're not able to lengthen, and that creates butt wink or back rounding. So this is stretch option number 1. The second stretch option, you could just do a standard frog stretch, which that should kind of make sense why this would be stretching the adductors, although I think that this is much more effective. And then if you want to do a standing version, there's lots of standing versions, but you could do the easiest one, which is you get a box, put your leg up onto it, keep your back flat, and then you just bend forward and you'll feel a big stretch in your adductor. So if you rounded, you're not going to feel as much of a stretch because you're not taking that attachment on the pelvis backwards in relation to this. And then there's a ton of other variations. There's saddle stretching, there's Cossack squatting or lateral lunging, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the basic anatomy of the adductors, how it affects two lifts especially, which would be the squat and the sumo deadlift, as well as some stretching suggestions. So that's what I got for you guys this week on Movement Fix Monday. Make sure to check out the workshops at themovementfix.com/workshops for 8 hours of stuff like this. And make sure to follow me on Instagram at The Movement Fix. I'll see you next week.